We know that no one can succeed alone. Since the Second World War, more than 120,000 Norwegian women and men have served shoulder to shoulder with friends and allied forces. They have participated in almost 100 missions, fighting for values on which we build our societies. A bridge of trust has been built between our brothers in arms and our allied countries. Some soldiers did not make it home, and many suffered injuries. A few have been honored as war heroes. None should be forgotten.
Welcome to Et øyeblikk, en evighet. We are currently at Lingeloftet, a club for special forces in Norway, dating back to the Second World War. And with me tonight, I have Andrew Borene. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Or should I call you Swede?
You could call me Swede, but since it's a Norwegian podcast, maybe we'll stick with Andrew.
That's great, Andrew. You have done services for many years and spent a big part of your life in the military service in the United States. Did you have any connection to the military before you entered?
Well, insofar as my grandfather actually was descended directly from Swedish immigrants and served in World War II. I was raised by my grandfather, and he had volunteered for service in World War II at 34 years of age, well past draft age. And I was very inspired by his sense of patriotism without being jingoistic about it, and a commitment to service. He was, in many ways, kind of a stoic in that way.
And then you decided to join up yourself.
I also had another relative, a first cousin Norwegian. My grandmother was Norwegian, and she had a first cousin named Wayne Johnson, who was very proud of his Norwegian Viking heritage and was an enormous man. But he served in the CIA Directorate of Operations as a case officer and had some really crazy stories about things that he would do on behalf of CIA overseas. And I got bit by the bug, I guess, kind of twofold. One was the possibility of service. And then the other was, boy, Cousin Wayne had these amazing stories, and I couldn't believe he got paid to do it, and frankly didn't go to jail for some of it. And I just thought it sounded like fun. So I had been working in an investment bank after college for a few years before 9/11. And at the end of 2000, I applied to 3 agencies, the CIA, the Peace Corps, and the Marine Corps. And a lot of people always think that's funny. Well, Peace Corps, Marine Corps, those aren't the same. And then CIA, that's a weird one. But this was before 9/11, and it was a way to get out and engage the world. Any one of those 3 agencies, I thought, would get me an opportunity to try something challenging and frankly work toward a freer world, enhance and promote democracy, and give me some experience. And the Marine Corps, frankly, just responded a lot faster than CIA or the Peace Corps.
And they promised you to experience the world.
They promised me that if I could pass officer candidate school, and at the time there was about a 50% attrition rate of those that didn't make it, they sent me to Quantico in January, and they said, if you can get through OCS and get a commission as a second lieutenant, we promise you that within 7 to 12 months, you will be someplace uncomfortable, doing challenging things with great people, and they absolutely delivered.
And then this was in 2001, and suddenly September came.
That's right. I got commissioned in August. 5 weeks later was the 9/11 attacks. And I was on recruiting duty as a temporary second lieutenant, sitting next to a Sergeant Leinenkugel, another Scandinavian. And we watched the second plane hit, and we watched the building fall. We evacuated the federal building that we were working out of as recruiters. And yeah, it definitely changed the trajectory of my life. I thought I would join the Marine Corps, spend a few years in service, and return to finance. As it turned out, I did leave the Marine Corps after a few years, but I stayed in support of U.S. national security for a little over 20 years in the private sector and also in and out of government.
Did you transition between the government and the private sector? Has that been very useful for you, or is it more a confusing period?
I've actually found it really helpful. There's this expression about sharks that a shark only lives if it keeps moving to get the oxygen through its gills. They don't stop and sleep. And, I don't think I'm a shark, but I definitely see that I gain so much by meeting people from diverse backgrounds, by experiencing different cultures. And I think that my transitions between the government and the private sector, and I've also been affiliated with a number of universities teaching things like transnational organized crime and how to combat it, and intelligence studies. And in all of those different kind of roles, I learned new things about different stakeholders. And I think it gives me an ability to help be a better connector and a better activator, in kind of my own journey. So I have found a lot of diverse experiences extremely helpful, and bringing the best things I learned in military service to the private sector, and some of the best things I've learned from the private sector back into government has been really helpful.
I would like to take you back to Iraq, because that's where you did most of your service in the Marine Corps. How did you meet the front line or the combat situation in Iraq, coming from civilized world back home?
That's well, I will say this. Part of why I joined the U.S. Marine Corps was that it was an amphibious service, and I thought it would be fun to go around on Navy ships and visit cool Mediterranean or Pacific ports. In nearly 4 years of service, I only got to spend 2 nights on boats, which, given my very diverse Scandinavian heritage, I think it hurt the little inner Viking inside of me to be so far removed from the ocean. But in truth, the threat environment had changed, and the needs of the American people. I have to be honest. Looking back, I'm not super excited about having invested so much in Iraq when Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda was the threat and had committed 9/11. But we all were in the same division working for General Mattis, 1st Marine Division at the time. He became Secretary of Defense. He's really kind of a legend in the U.S. Military and national security community. But as a leader, General Mattis made it very clear our responsibility was always to each other first and to the American people. And when the American people's government sends us on a mission, we execute that mission on behalf of our nation and on behalf of the international partners that we work with. And I went to Iraq in about January, a few months before the invasion started, March 19th. And on March 19th, with the other members of the 1st Marine Division, we crossed into Iraq on a major combat operation that took us on this gets to the Viking roots piece. We did do the longest amphibious invasion and combat movement, I believe, in world history, from Kuwait to Baghdad, and then some of the elements pushed forward into Tikrit. So I am proud of it. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge the fact that there is some inner moral turmoil about having participated in something that I kind of look back on and say, hey, from a foreign policy perspective, that might not have been the best strategic move. But I have lifelong friends. I'm proud of that service. And it was, I'm not going to lie to you, it was quite a shock. We were anticipating up to 70% casualties in some of the battalions. Very fortunately, that did not happen. We did lose the lives of friends. We lost lives of colleagues. We have many more wounded, because the interesting observation I have about major combat in 2003 is that what they call the golden hour for getting a casualty extracted, the percentage rate that we were able to do in 2003 from what it was even 30 years prior in Vietnam was incredible. So many more survived than would have been killed, given prior technology. And so I think that's an untold story of the cost of combat. The combat can be just as intense, but the killed in action numbers are much smaller. And I think that means then we have many more survivors who have experienced really some pretty, either you call it exciting, because it is exciting. You can also call it terrifying, because it could be terrifying. But also, I guess you see some aspects of human nature that you didn't expect to, coming from a civilized society.
How did you experience combat? What did you feel? How did you react to it?
Well, so Marines are, as a whole, famous for being a little different than perhaps the other armed services. It's a very, I was a military intelligence officer, but it's a very infantry-centric culture. And it actually was kind of funny, because when I got orders to go for the buildup in the invasion of Iraq at 1st Marine Division, had many colleagues, and myself included, were like, oh man, that's great. You're not going to miss the war, right? Everybody thought it would be like the first Gulf War in the 90s, where it would be over in 3 to 4 days. And I would have gotten to be a part of it. We did not at that time know that it would turn into a multiple decades long counterinsurgency campaign. But so in many ways, I was very excited. It was the opportunity to do what I signed up to do a little differently, right? I had hoped to be doing amphibious raids out of boats and be traditional amphibious Marine Corps. But it was an expeditionary journey. And so it was a mix of excitement and terror during that buildup and going on the deployment. I also, as a military intelligence officer, had some insight into what our fears were on those casualty statistics, and our fears that if Saddam Hussein and any of the Republican Guard were to, for instance, use VX gas, it could have been horrific for us, but we would have had to keep pressing. And so I wrote a will. I was married. My wife was pregnant. And I was also struggling in many ways at that time with, at 20 some years old, the fear that this might be my last time on U.S. soil as we got on those airplanes to Kuwait. And then each day would be this kind of recurring thought that this might be the last day I see the sun. And it was a mix of terrifying and excitement, and it made every single moment of every day matter. And ever since, it's been a little hard to kind of grasp that same level of excitement, even during the buildup, and then certainly through the movement to Baghdad, and the excitement of the invasion, particularly the heavy weeks of that movement. Yeah, I will be honest, I've never since experienced the same level of living in the moment and feeling so alive. I think it's probably in some ways like I've heard heroin addicts talk about heroin, and I can see why people like us sometimes are attracted to the level of excitement that it can bring.
We have to talk about other forces that you are cooperating with, and being an allied of the Norwegian armed forces. Do you ever interacted with the Norwegians on any missions or operations?
Yeah, I bumped into Norwegians actually in a lot of places in the world. Nice to be here in Norway with Norwegians. One of my favorite Norwegians, Magna Rodal, is a legend in your special forces and special operations community. He's also a legend in the American special operations and special forces community. People know Magna and in NATO. So I just want to give a shout out to my buddy Magna. And I also want to say thank you to you, Tom. I want to give another shout out to my friend Asbjørn Lysgaard. Asbjørn and I have been crossing paths, over a decade. I've bumped into him in some pretty interesting places. And he spent some time as a liaison to U.S. Special Operations Command. And I would bump into him in Tampa. And then he went to the Marine Corps Command and Staff. So I bumped into him there. But my favorite story of bumping into Norwegians actually happens in the deserts of the Middle East. So it's actually, like I said, I'm diverse. I have Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish ancestry. And when I was a group chief at the National Counterterrorism Center, I took a visit to one of our Middle Eastern sites where we have a pretty healthy, and I'm a bureaucrat, buddy. I want to be very clear. I'm not a tough guy like the Special Forces fellas and the Lingaloft members. But as a bureaucrat and an executive leader, I went and visited U.S. and allied troops from NATO and then also beyond NATO, working on a counterterrorism mission against Salafist extremists. And I bumped into, during one of my briefs, some Norwegians, and they were with some Swedes. And they found out I was from Minnesota, and they saw that my nickname was Swede. Oh, are you Swedish? I'm like, well, by descent, and blah, blah. And I was also Norwegian and Danish. And oh, you're Norwegian. And do you guys eat lefse? And yeah, they eat lefse. I said, oh, and I made a joke. I was like, hey, it must be really hard to find lefse potato pancakes and cinnamon out here in the desert. And the Norwegians lit up, and the Swedes lit up. Oh, hey, we have a secret stash. You'd be surprised. We have lefse. We don't leave without it. And I was like, oh, really? And I kid you not. So after that briefing, I moved on to some other meetings. And I don't know if it was a half hour, 45 minutes later. One of the Norwegians in uniform runs up and he says, hey, sir. By the way, they should never call me sir because I don't feel worthy, right? Especially because I'm a bureaucrat. And these are guys that are living downrange in the desert, and some men and women. But they hand me frozen lefse with sugar and cinnamon in it. And thought, oh, sir, you should let this thaw out and eat it. But I do want to say, that one is really poignant to me because here were Norwegian forces working with partnership with Swedes, with other, not NATO proper, but other members of the NATO alliance, and on a common mission, but also really to show the importance of the human bond, right? I will never forget that moment of kindness and bonding, and also the lightheartedness, right? And the camaraderie that we all find out on a mission. I think it's really important that we do share those stories and bring them back to our home nations because it makes for a stronger free world alliance. And oftentimes those that work in kind of bureaucrat jobs, like what I have mostly done in offices, aren't out. And it's really important to see that exchange of goodwill. And I think that's the Norwegians in particular, because I think of the Gunnarsons to be legacy and the really commitment to resistance and freedom. I've just always been extremely impressed with the Norwegian Forces. And I've also participated in a number of exchanges, again, as a civilian supporting. The Norex exchange is the longest standing troop exchange between any two militaries. And it's Norway and the United States, and it's the Minnesota National Guard. And so the Norwegians have always been wonderful partners and second to none on the special forces front. But I want to say the importance of conventional military force. The first combat commanding general of a NATO unit is a Norwegian woman general who started as a basic enlisted soldier and participated in that exchange to Minnesota. So I just think there's a lot of really great things to be proud of from Norway. And I think because of that, right, who is the longest standing military exchange in the entire U.S. Department of Defense? That should tell you something about how important this alliance is and how important these relationships are. So
the thing is that nobody's good alone. You have to have good friends and good allies to accomplish something.
100%. In counterterrorism, I used to talk a lot, and I can't claim credit for this, but there's another General Nagata. I have to give a credit to General Nagata for saying this kind of thing because he's smart. And kind of two components of counterterrorism are extremely important: comparative advantage and burden sharing. The United States is big, but the United States cannot monitor and assess threat and then act on mitigating threats on these transnational issues like terrorism. Right. And so it's really important that we burden share and other free world partners contribute and help. And when we do that as equal partners. Right. The individual soldier, the individual law enforcement officer, the individual analyst commits exactly the same, whatever country they're from. Right. And so that's kind of my first piece on friends. But then when you talk about allies, I love that word allies, because I think an ally is someone who in crisis is obligated by bond to show up and support and defend. And so I think it's really tough in life to move forward, whether you're an individual or even nations, without very strong friends and real allies.
Can I ask you if you have, during all your year of service, experienced the one moment, the one split second that to you will last for an eternity?
It's funny. I have many. I've had the good fortune of having done a lot of really amazing kind of pinch me things, more like Forrest Gump. I stumble into stuff, and there I was. So one of them, though, is I have a photograph of it, but there was a burning oil well, like a pipeline on the way into Iraq, and it was March 19th or maybe the 20th in the morning. I can't say the exact date, but I distinctly remember because, one, I hadn't slept in days. I was hungry. We were chewing Copenhagen and drinking Mountain Dew, the last ones in the can, because now we're moving into this combat operation. But this oil well was shooting a flame across the road that all the Humvees, all the trucks, all the tanks, all the amphibious tractors of the entire 1st Marine Division and any support were going to have to drive under. And the cloud was making the sky dark and black. And I remember looking at it like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And it was shooting the occasional little spark of oil. It was burning off the natural gas and making this black cloud smoke. Those little spurts of oil would shoot periodically over the road. And I remember I was so terrified. I would never, ever in my right mind drive under this like flaming oil well. And then you could see that here's this convoy really slowly inching through it. And it occurred to me that every other single Marine, sailor, soldier, airman, or support person that was with us on this movement was also driving under that flaming oil well. And that, that is really my experience, because it was terrifying. And then the kind of unity of watching other people be brave kind of, I think, instilled some courage in me for the moment. And if you had to ask me, what's the thing I remember that oil well, I remember the black sky, I remember the terror, and I remember that just being part of a moving unit and knowing that everyone was sharing exactly that same burden gave me the power to move forward.
I want to jump a bit in time, because what are you doing today? Because you have your big, long experience with everything, and you're retired from the service. Today you are also, you haven't laid down your arms yet. You are still participating in some sort of security business.
I guess I haven't laid down my keyboard and microphone at this point. At this age, that's what I get to do. So, it's been amazing. I got to finish with some really great jobs in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and then working in our Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which kind of helps coordinate all of the U.S. intelligence agencies. And that was I kind of view it as a great parting thing. And now I'm a former government employee and a former intelligence officer. And I work for a threat intelligence firm called Flashpoint, which it's worldwide. We have about 400 employees. And we focus on monitoring threat groups to help governments and large financial institutions and big tech companies see and react to threats to help them avoid really significant risk to their people, their assets, their reputations. And so I'm kind of still involved in security. And just as a quick example, pinch me, Forrest Gump. Just yesterday, I was in Stockholm and I had the great honor of meeting the former Prime Minister, Carl Bildt. And the Prime Minister and another team of folks are working on reforming some Swedish intelligence issues and leveraging open source intelligence, what's publicly available. What can commercial companies provide? Back to your earlier question on public sector, private sector. And so I don't know if I was helpful, but I really hope I was, because a lot of that conversation there as well is the importance of friends and allies and building international partnerships and public-private partnerships that defend the free world and defend our values.
Because that's what it's all about, isn't it?
At the end of the day, it is about values. And I think that's where we can always unite. As you know, and again, this is so great to be in the Lingoloft with the Gunnar Sandsteby Foundation thing happening this same week. Is Gunnar Sandsteby spent a lifetime after his service educating the public about the need to be prepared to face down threats to our values. And what are those values? Those values for us are we defend human rights. The individual human being matters. We believe in the freedom of speech and in the freedom of religion and these really core fundamental values that we can always unite around as friends and allies. And that does mean that there are some things that we oppose, and we oppose fascism. We oppose a vitriolic form of communism, whether it comes from Putin's cronies in the Russian Federation or the Communist Party of China and their aggressive expansion. We can actually identify value systems that don't align with ours. It could be Salafist extremism, which is intolerant of anything that is not within their worldview. And so I think that's maybe that is the key thing, that values are really what unite us. And we can put it together into action with person-to-person trust relationships.
To defend the freedom that we all enjoy comes at a cost.
Absolutely.
And you personally have your inner demons that you have been struggling with. You told me earlier that you've been fighting alcoholism, you have PTSD, and how do you cope with that? And what did you do to remedy it?
Yeah, that's boy. We're cutting to the quick, as they say. So in my case, and I want to be very clear for any of your listeners. The vast majority of military veterans and combat veterans come back, have some adjustment, and they move right back into civilian society, and everything is great. Some of us have combat exposure, and it can either, in my case, kind of accelerate my alcoholism and my kind of excitement-seeking behavior. I couldn't find it in the world. I grew up playing football and rugby and ice hockey, and I used to repossess cars. I got a lot of excitement, but I couldn't replicate what happened and what I got to have in that combat experience. And after I left the Marine Corps, I didn't have a tribe, and I really started drinking heavily. I kind of thought I was partying, but I wasn't. I was trying to meet an unfulfilled hole inside of me. So back to that point about how vast majority don't have that issue. I mean, what if it's 80% don't, 90% don't? Well, through no fault really, and this was an important part for me. I want to destigmatize this for others that might have some of these symptoms that I had. I was having symptoms in 2004, 2005, and 2006. That's years after my return. I had night sweats. I would have nightmares. I would have these haunting images of a few things where I thought I made some bad decisions, right? And I would tell myself I was a coward. And I would say some really, really mean things to myself, my kind of inner voice. You talk about demons. And it came to a head in 2006. And I have not had a drink since. I have sought help. I now tell people that I've struggled with some of these PTSD symptoms, but I had to go to inpatient treatment. I had to ask for help. I had to learn some new skills. And we talked a little, I think, earlier about TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And those TTPs for me included, again, ask for help, finding a tribe of people that also were in this kind of minority that had some challenges, but wanted to move forward, right? And that has empowered me now. I've moved completely sober from alcohol and any mood-altering drugs since 2006. But I've done it with help from, there's a number of 12-step groups that exist. Even non-veterans can use those. Within the military community, the Veterans Administration in the U.S. gave me a lot of help on counseling for PTSD and some groups to get into, where I bumped into, former flag rank officers and former PFCs and lance corporals. And what it taught me is that I wasn't alone and that it was okay for me to need that help and to get that help. And so, I'm very happy to say that 17 and a half years later, I'm still doing the things. It's just for me personally, it requires a little bit of help. And the most important piece of all of that for me was, without realizing it, I had a spiritual crisis. Something happened spiritually that this is just me telling my story. Something happened and I thought God turned God's back on me because I had done some things. And maybe it was, I saw the things and I didn't act, right? And there's a more sophisticated answer to that. I've heard military chaplains now use the word moral wounding. But I had to reestablish my connection with a higher power of some kind. And for me, I got a lot of help from a former Marine who is a Lutheran minister. And he was amazing. He said, 1, getting sober is going to be the best thing you ever did. Welcome to the club. And 2, start exploring your relationship with God, whatever your understanding of God is. And this was a Lutheran minister. He didn't say you have to do it this way. You say these prayers. But I had to reconnect with a higher power. And I still do. On a regular basis, I have to spend time in prayer and meditation. And frankly, I think a lot of the skills I learned in recovery for mental health have been part of these new TTPs. I learned great things in the military. I learned great things in private sector. I learned great things from all these mentors and leadership. But it is the spiritual connection that helps me tie my personal understanding of values with my daily life. And I don't know if that's helpful or not, but anyone listening, I just want them to know that struggle with symptoms can be treated, but we have to ask for help. And many of us that are military veterans or are national security veterans, or police, the tough guy, tough women, right? Here in Norway, you have an amazing women's special forces component. You're really world-beating women in combat arms. And whether you're a man or a woman, you may find yourself struggling with some of this. And if I could encourage anyone to ask for help who needs it, I promise that life gets better on the other side, and anything we're struggling with can be addressed with the help of other people and with a connection to a higher power.
So it's not just only been fighting crime and terrorism. You also have a life afterwards that sort of try to wrap up your whole career, and also working with different agencies in that respect. How can you cope with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, again, for anyone who's listening, one of the big components for me, again, after that 2006 crisis and recovery, was, in addition to kind of spiritual connection and getting help and some of these other aspects that brought a tribe, so to speak, back into my life, being of service has become really important. Trying to find ways to give back and help support others. And so a couple of things I'm involved in that I'm kind of honored and humbled to be a part of. One of them is the Special Operations Association of America, SOAA. Not because I'm a special operator, but because I'm so grateful for the really unique contribution that Green Berets make in America and their special forces or SOF colleagues from NSW, Marine Corps Special Operations Command, AFSOC, et cetera, and then the women and men that support them. So because there's kind of a unique contribution there, I'm honored to try to help support a lot of what SOAA does is support transition back to the private sector or back to civilian life after service, in addition to supporting folks and families when their loved ones are deployed. So that has been quite an honor to support people that I look up to. Some other activities that I really love and support is one is called the Global Soft Foundation. Our friend Magna is involved heavily in that, as is a fellow named Stu Braden. The two of them created a NATO soft liaison unit and built a lot of human connectivity in a very important aspect of all of our collective defense. And so, the Global Soft Foundation, I joined it as soon as they kind of started that nonprofit because it was, again, committed to building international alliances and partnerships. And it does great work uniting the public and the private sector and keeping kind of formers engaged, in addition to helping navigate people that are new to the community. So that's been pretty great. And so I've been in a very lucky position that I have a great private sector job. I've got some nonprofit activity that I get to help with. I guess for me, it's just been a great expanding kind of experience of network of friends and hopefully building new allies personally, but also internationally. So it's been it's been a really great career. I hope I got a lot more left in me as a private citizen.
So the heritage of the U.S. Norwegian work together, just doing not only these days, but also during the Second World War, you have also done something to commemorate that.
Yeah, actually, and kind of public-private partnerships come into play here as well. My friend Magna Rodal, who's CEO of Maxim Defense here in Norway, and former Special Forces, and I had met and had a conversation in Tampa during an International Soft Week event. And we kind of hatched a scheme. And here's the thing about guys like Magna and Asbjorn and your Norwegian Special Forces alums. You say you're going to do something, they actually do it. And so Magna and I talked about doing something to honor the 50th anniversary of this longest standing troop exchange in all of the world, and also in the U.S. Department of Defense. And we had a conversation about, because Sweden and Finland had not yet been admitted to the alliance, but that Sweden and Finland had made bids for NATO membership. And there's a massive Scandinavian, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Finnish diaspora population in Minnesota. Hey, let's do a 50th anniversary event in Minnesota to get NOREX some exposure and involve these diaspora populations, and also kind of explain what is the threat emerging on the eastern edge of Europe that's bringing these allies together. So I think between Maxim and Flashpoint and Magna's efforts, and the Norway House in Minnesota, our friends there helped bring in the defense attaches. So we ended up with embassy participation from the Norwegian embassy, flew in from Washington. We had some private sector folks. We had Macalester College hosted us. We had another really cool Norwegian American history piece, is the 99th Battalion. Which was a special battalion of American soldiers who had Norwegian ancestry, could speak Norwegian fluently, and knew how to cross-country ski in order to help fight the resistance against Nazi fascism at that time. So I got to be honest, it ended up being a much bigger success than frankly I could ever have done. And it all stemmed from a conversation over a cigar in Tampa. But yeah, I think it is such a great example of why alliances matter and why comparative advantage matters, right? And and Norway needs allies, but America needs allies. Everybody, all of us that share those values, we can't possibly defend them if we don't have citizens willing to serve in the military, if we don't have societies that embrace and support. They don't have to serve in the military, but it is important that the profession of arms, and we talked about law enforcement and some of these other professions in the security space, they're not all knuckle draggers. A lot of sensitive people, very thoughtful people participate in those roles. Yeah, I think the Norwegian one is an amazing example especially with the Gunnar Sonsby legacy and Gunnar's personal commitment. Again, after service, educating the public that we need to remember what it is we fight for.
In Friends and Allies, we hear the stories of some of our closest supporters, reliving with them some of their most intense moments. Et øyeblikk, en evighet.